Hello, and welcome to another discussion in the SF Masterworks reading group. We are working our way through the SF Masterworks in the order they were published as Masterworks by Golangs, I think, is the publisher. We read one book every month, and today's discussion is going to be Behold the Man by Michael Moorcock. This was the May book. I think it's going to go up early June. And there you go, that carefully planned swipe across the screen of the two editions of the book that we read this month. And yeah, if you would like to read along with us, pick and choose as we go, or just read all of them with us, or join us for these discussions. They are open to anybody interested. We do all the planning on the Patreon forum. Please check that out if you're interested. The book for next month, June, is going to be The Book of Skulls by Robert Silverberg. The book after that is a bind up of The Time Machine and the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, but we're going to be doing two separate discussions for that. So we'll be reading The Time Machine in July and The War of the Worlds in August. And Flowers for Algernon is the September book. Yeah, so that's all the bookkeeping stuff. Everybody will go around introducing themselves. Jared, could you start us off?
Sure. I'm Jared, a fantasy thinker, YouTube channel, and on Speculation Podcast and other fine podcasts on pagechewing.com.
Excellent. And Layla.
I'm Layla Goshi. I'm a poet and writer. I have a poetry collection or chapbook coming out in September, happy to say. And I love reading science fiction. So
Very nice. And it's really good to have you back. You were there for the first
few. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. And Chris.
Oh, me. My turn. Yes, Chris from the Chronicle Chris YouTube channel. And yes, very delighted to have Layla back as well. This is very exciting.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes. Behold the Man. Short book, fast read. More thoughts.
So I can give a byline for this one quickly. The lengths that a man will go to win an argument with his girlfriend.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I mean, seriously. I gotta prove a theological point, a philosophical point, a psychological point. I'm gonna be Jesus. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. I'll get crucified and all. I'll do the whole lot.
I will go through the pain, so I don't have to go through the pain of you telling me I am wrong yet again.
That is brilliant. Wow.
So,
Wow.
how many of you read the blurb before you read the book?
I did not.
No one?
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
It basically tells you everything, right?
Yeah.
It tells you what happens in the last 20 pages of the book, which I don't know if I would have seen it coming if I had not read the blurb.
Yeah.
It says...
You would have.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
You would have. Yeah.
You would have.
I think it's quite obvious. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
I could still see how the end could be surprising to some, just exactly how it would work out, because you could also consider that there would be a different spin where it's like he did end up changing history, by time traveling. So I think there was enough doubt, but I ended up reading the blurb because I first found the shorter version that's in an anthology, and then I reached out to Varsha to make sure. But so I did a little extra investigating, and then learned what it was all about. So
Nice. Yeah.
Did you read the shorter version first, or?
Yes.
I did not. Now I'm wishing I had. Just just to compare. Maybe I'll go back and do that.
Yeah, I'd be curious what was cut. I'm wondering if maybe his backstory was cut from the short story, just the part with the time travel? And how would that
I
read?
sort of feel like you can cut most of the last 20 pages out, because I found the last 20 pages a bit of a roll up of the Christian story of Jesus. Like, that was pretty much exactly what happened for the last 20 pages or so, making that. It's sort of the book for me anticlimactic, because, as Jared said, even without reading the blurb, it's very clear where this is going after about 30 or 40 pages. I think you kind of see the dots being joined up ahead of you. I think I was reading it thinking to myself, I sort of hope it doesn't go there, because then I know exactly how it's going to play out. You know, it's sort of there. But I mean, there were still some surprises on the way when he does go and meet Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. I mean, that was a choice. That was a real choice about how he handled that encounter. Like,
I felt, that scene, I felt like there was some horror in this. This was like light horror and dark humor at the same time,
interesting.
because half the time I'm thinking he has himself trapped in this timeline, and it's like he's having this nightmare where his assumptions are continually being challenged or negated, falsified. So there's kind of to me, a psychological horror. I mean, especially visiting Joseph, Mary, and Jesus's house. I don't know, and maybe it just hit me that way. Like, how more horrifying? It probably could get a lot more horrifying, but to me, that was, I would say, psychologically horrifying if you had these assumptions all these years, centuries, as to what a story was. So,
Interesting.
yeah, but then dark humor, I found the ending funny. I don't know if anybody else.
Crucifixion's always hilarious. You're thinking of Life of Brian as well. I mean, and another humorous end, to that,
Yeah.
it ends in a song and whatever else. It's dark horror kind of aspects to it, because I had it a bit more as a farce in some ways, especially by the time it got to that stage of like almost playing with the shock value. And this book does have a couple of moments where it's really shocking in places. Like, the use of sex and stuff in it is really strange within the book. It's sort of inconsistent, I think, with a lot of the rest of it in places, and it's like, it makes you sit up and go, what has just happened? Did I read that right? I don't really want to read that sentence again, but I'm going to make sure I didn't miss it.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
it's funny because it's of course it's a sci-fi classic, but I didn't think it was any sci-fi at all. I thought it was more fantasy than anything else. The fantasy of, because they, the only sci-fi thing is the time travel, and they don't explain the time travel. They don't explain how it works. They don't explain anything about it. Just that somebody invented something and he off he goes. And so it's more of that fantasy of, where could I go back in time? What would I want to see? What would I want to witness? What would I want to prove out or even change? And everybody's had those fantasies. Everybody's had wondered about that. If I could go back in time, where would I go? What would I see? It's like one of the questions that pops up on the 10 questions on page chewing. And so and that's to me, that's just a fantasy of wanting to find that out. Then you tie into the story all of this. He's had some psychological trauma. He's been abused as a kid. And he has mommy issues, and he has, and that leads into his girlfriend issues. And so he it all that's the psychological trip part of it, that he's a messed up person when he's going back and living out his fantasy about going back in time. And it helps to lead to the psychological trauma of him just being in that kind of psychological haze that makes him fit into the role that he's actually trying to discover. And so he, in that sense, that he becomes the crucified figure, both in his head and what actually happens at the end. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I thought it was a very well written story. And I liked how um, he paired scripture, as he kind of folded that into the story. And so it really took some thinking and some thought, you know so that the story became something on multiple levels, you know um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I really like how he brought in, you know, the Jungian philosophy.
that
Hmm.
too.
Yes.
You know, dealing with the archetypes. Of course, Jesus Christ being one of the biggest archetypes there is, and um, and how he was, that was the crux of the argument with his girlfriend, of course, that about the how he interprets young philosophy and stuff like that, um, and I thought that was interesting because um, archetypes are something that doesn't go away, especially in fantasy literature and in sci-fi literature. It's a main driving force of a lot of that literature. So it's interesting how he was playing with one of the ultimate archetypes in theology, and so he's playing with that and he's tying it into a fantastical tale, and so I like how he did all that, and he did it through the psychology and philosophy of Carl Jung. Is pretty interesting.
And our
Yeah.
character's first name is Young too, very subtly. It's Carl, sorry, not Young. Sorry, yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, right, yep. Yep.
But it is interesting how he used time travel to subvert the course of history. Like they kind of do it back to front. Modern philosophy and psychology kind of trumped historical, if you know what I mean, or replaced historical thinkings and teaching and philosophies, especially theological ones. That exactly what he was arguing with Monica, as it was at the time, and how useless he was. Like, but I am Jesus. That's all I could think at the end of it. Yeah, it just would have been a good way to the end of it. I was Jesus.
I like the reframing of it as history and like in terms of history and politics, right? And it was interesting. I was trying to think of an equivalent Indian mythology that this kind of story might work. Um, I don't have an answer yet. I'll keep looking.
Mhm.
But I think it's really driven by prophecy and what will happen next. And I guess also knowing how this was interpreted 2000 years later, that I think made for a really nice environment for him to fulfill the prophecy and not seem out of place, and also like provide prophecies of his own, um, go around predicting things because he already knows the history, which um, yeah, I guess that part of it with the time travel, the chicken and egg problem with time travel always, right? Like the causality issues that crop up. If this happened, so you know about it, you come back here, you know about it, so you make this happen. And yeah, those kinds of issues that crop up with time travel, I think was, I wouldn't say explored, but the staple of time travel stories that was there, and it was comforting in amongst everything else.
Yeah.
Another thing I
It's in,
thought. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Lelena, please.
No, another thing I thought was interesting was when he runs away from John the Baptist, and then later someone from that group comes and tells him, "Oh, John needs you," and even though John saved him, he's like, "Nope, can't help him," um, and leaving him to his fate. I don't know, I didn't know how to think about that. Um, I mean, would he have changed, would have made a difference, would have changed history anyway if he had saved him and then gone on into the city. Um, yeah, so I thought that was interesting just how he played around with that situation. And then the other, I really, the impression I got, and maybe I was looking for symbols, but is Monica symbolic of Mary Magdalene? Like the
I,
supposedly, um,
I
yeah,
thought about that as well. To be honest, I was looking for it in some ways, Leila, because I was looking again for the archetypes in modern day Carl's life versus Jesus as well.
yeah,
It did kind of thing, but Mary Magdalene, as far as I remember, was a lot more devoted to Jesus in this case. They have their relationship's very strange for sure. Like it doesn't seem to be anything much more than a physical relationship, and this kind of almost mental sparring that they do with each other. They're on maybe an intellectual level, but neither of them likes the other person's viewpoints particularly much or respects them, even to the point that they are both quite dismissive. We get the first person thoughts of our character Carl and the second hand thoughts of Monica, but they basically seem the same people insofar as they don't want to give in either side. There's no give in the argument, so it's like argument for argument's sake rather than actually a challenging intellectual argument, because
yeah,
that's just for us, not for each other.
yeah.
Interesting. I find it interesting. You mentioned him running away from John the Baptist, but that perfectly echoes him running away from the church when he was 15. When
Uh-huh.
he was getting hit on by the priest there, and
Oh,
so
great.
he has a history of that. He has a history of running away from religious figures, and it's just after being somewhat involved with them,
Yeah.
and because he did participate in the baptism, John the
Mm-hmm.
Baptist, and fulfilling the role that that people knew from the stories, and so it was just it was interesting how that echoed, through his own life and the ages he had that, and then he runs away from John the Baptist, and he goes off, and because he's looking for Nazareth, and he's looking for other answers, that because I don't think, like is often true in any history, the reality didn't live up to what he thought it was,
Mhm.
and that's often true with tons of history. The reality just is never going to live up to what people believe happens, and so I think that was a very one of the strengths of the book was that things just don't live up to what people think they are. I think, and that I really like that aspect of it, because he, just the way that he even says that, like on the towards the end here, uh, I he says, I will give them cause, just like Jesus said, um, and he just says to himself, there was no other way to organize this. The chroniclers would rearrange it. Like,
Yeah.
he already knows that whoever's recording this stuff eventually is going not to record it the way it actually happened. And I think that's kind of the point that Moorcock's making throughout the whole book here.
Mythologize. It's like it's sort of a parable for, I think, what would happen if time travel was possible and you took somebody from modern society and dropped them into any period in ancient history, especially with foreknowledge of the events that are there, even without knowledge of the Prime Directive, which this book did not have. Going using your Star Trek relevant, I don't think you'd have any choice other than to see the fact that you could play out the legend in your own right. I sort of felt that there was an inevitability about it in some ways because of who he was and kind of what happened. And the irony then, of course, is that he was not a religious man, really. In fact, the church did everything they could to get him to turn away from religion. The archetype of religion and what it morphed into was used for evil on him, and yet he sort of became the symbol for that very religion in a lot of ways by putting himself in that and choosing that in some ways. And I think that's a really interesting philosophical kind of discussion in that, insofar as, you know, being the figurehead. And he didn't do it for glory. It wasn't like for fame or for ego that he really did it. He did it just because he felt like he had to carry out a prophecy in some ways, which is again very fantasy trope, you know, in a lot of sense of being literally the chosen one the whole way through, and him being the reluctant person in that story.
Absolutely.
You know, didn't Monica tell him, or he ran it through his own mind toward the end of the book, where, remembering Monica saying, you always wanted to be the center of attention, or you were always the martyr, you know, and so in a sense he had reached his finest hour, you know, in terms of what his ego wanted.
You know?
Yeah.
There's a great line in here to go along with that, and it's were the great individualists the products of their friends who wanted a great individualist as a friend. And I was just like, oh, that's great.
And also on top of that, then the idea that it was better to live a life with meaning rather than live a long life, you know, and that kind of sense that he sort of didn't fear the crucifixion at all or anything like that. It was very much, it was his fate, and it was just what was going to happen. And I especially liked how they reframed a lot of the Jesus's kind of what's the word? His ministry and the events that happened that we get told about these days, about the miracles and that kind of stuff, and how a lot of that was reframed much the way, as you said, Jared, so far as the people telling the story would make that into something that it was not at the time, and kind of use that idea of storytellers and otherwise to kind of explain the events of the time. In a lot of ways, which I thought was very clever, especially when you weave in, as Leila said, the scripture into the text, and then show you actually what that would have translated as within Matthew's gospel or otherwise.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Dude, what were you saying, Chris, about the? Oh yeah, the religion being, that was interesting with the people who follow the followers of the faith, or even the keepers of the faith who behaved poorly. He didn't lose his own faith because of that. It seems that, like, based on the arguments that we get to participate in with his girlfriend, he seems to have a belief, or like he wants the abstract idea of religion to work, and or he believes in that just because he thinks science can't be the answer to the problem. I get the sense that he thinks that it's like there's a coldness to it that a religion does not have, that he can maybe fall back on it. I think he thinks to himself at some point that he wants a personal God, even more personal than the God of Christianity, which was interesting to me. Like, the Christian God feels pretty personal, that in that, like, people pray and he does things for you and punishes you and whatnot based on your actions. But he wants something even more personal than that, which was interesting. So anyway, yeah, that exploration was interesting, that the bad purveyors of the religion did not make him lose faith in the abstract idea.
Yeah, interesting.
So they kept saying that you're looking for the Holy Grail, and you're looking for the Holy Grail, and I kept waiting for it to show up. Did it show up? Was that the cup in which they fed him something from towards the end?
Oh, good question.
But that is what the Holy Grail is, isn't it? The chalice that Jesus had in the Last Supper.
Mhm.
That is.
Yes, right.
If I think back to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, that's exactly what that was.
The font of accurate information there, Chris.
Yes, indeed.
I'm quoting my Da Vinci. I don't know where you're getting your sources.
I mean, we are both quoting from historical factual records, so that's the.
Sorry.
Oh man.
Wait, what? Dan Brown. Why did I call him Da Vinci? Like it was the Da Vinci Code. That's it. Yes.
That's weakened your argument somewhat, Farsha, to go from Da Vinci to Dan Brown.
That's what I meant all along. So it's only weekend in your head.
I mean, it really is going some. It's really going some to make my argument stand up further by just using Dan Brown. Maybe.
Yeah, but also Holy Grail can also just be a symbol for trying to attain something that is mostly unattainable, and so
Right.
that's a you're always looking for that Holy Grail. Mankind's looking for that Holy Grail when they're seeking the stars and stuff like that. It's a constant striving and searching for something that's quite unreachable, and that's what our protagonist Carl is looking for as well. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
I found it interesting. It just made me think that, it was Carl who had such a depth of, such an absence of what he was really seeking, whereas like John the Baptist and the rabbis that helped him, others who helped sustain him, they had a belief. They were waiting for him, but really they had a sincerity all along. That's how I was taking it, because they were sustaining him and they were feeding him.
That's right. Yeah.
Where they, but then the miracles, they seemed to think he was the miracle worker when it was really, in a sense, the reverse, because they were saving his life.
That's true.
The more you think about it, just there's so many different threads you can pull out of this story, meaningful threads. And something else I noticed, there was a contemporary reference in there when he was talking to Monica about he didn't put it by name, but Jesus Christ Superstar, the musical. Did anyone notice that? I think he was making a comparison as well. I should have pulled up in fact, I think I can pull up
I think this book would have well predated Jesus Christ Superstar the musical.
Was that out in 69?
61, this book?
69.
Oh, was it 69, was it?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Maybe. No, it might have been, yeah, the Jesus Christ Superstar, the original. I thought it was 61, sorry.
Well, he
premiere of,
I
think 71, I believe. Yeah, 71, the initial album came out, and then they got back in because of the success of the album to do the stage production.
Yeah, I should have, well, he made a reference to a show. So I don't know if it was Jesus Christ Superstar, but it was a show where someone was playing the role of Jesus, and he was, he was taking exception to that. And
yeah.
So, but I saw that maybe as a contemporary reference, just of
it could well have been. There's no doubt.
Yeah, but what the story had turned into as just something for popular culture,
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe
if there would have been Pasolini's Gospel according to St. Matthew would have been a film out within the time that was being written as well. So I'm sure there were many depictions of that make that true. Because I did struggle with some of the contemporariness. I had to look up the time they were talking about, because they were talking about watching TV and stuff, and not very many of the sci-fi books that we've been reading this series have kind of been able to touch on that, because a lot of them predate that sort of technology. Not all of them, but a lot of them do, and that's kind of like, it was kind of stuck out a little bit to see some sort of modern technology in any of these books, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting that talking about Monica again, how she was kind of kind of taking care of him at certain points. He gets drunk, she kind of drags him around and holds him up and kind of helps him recover. And then the main word I remember from her after taking care of one of his drunken binges, she says, "Every man's life diminishes me," as she drags him through the doorway. And I was just like, that's just a metaphor right there for um, how the 2,000 years of the Christian church have been diminishing woman since it started, and I was just like, it just really hit that Monica would be the person um, to kind of point that out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's that idea Monica has, that the person or the figurehead is not as important as the myth that it creates, isn't that sort of what she was talking about?
Yes, yeah.
And that actually that's exactly what his life kind of put together. One of the really interesting things for me reading this, as somebody that has been grown up and raised a Catholic, is I can't believe there aren't lots of signs with Michael Moorcock's face on it, citing blasphemy throughout a lot of this book. A lot of the things that he plays with in this, a lot of people I can see would be very upset by.
Yeah,
The depiction of Mary.
How popular was it, this book?
Well, I think that's exactly the point. But if you kind of compare it to, okay, if this book came out in 1969, say, compare it to something like the Satanic Verses and the kind of the fallout from the Satanic Verses, this plays with it a lot more. I think there's lots of things within this book that I think a lot of people, if it was part of popular zeitgeist and that kind of stuff, would be that's not right. You don't play with facts like that.
Yeah, I wondered that too. I really did. I wonder if that's just an indication of readers, or sci-fi fantasy readers just more open to, like twists, twists in the story like this, and philosophical ideas, because I really think it's very philosophical in the end. It's asking, questioning, having us question so much. And oh yeah, sorry. I did find that section. I think it's on page 125, 124 and 25, where it's about a pop group. Yeah.
Interesting.
Was it? The program was a religious one about a pop opera in a Hampstead church. The opera told the story of the crucifixion. Pop groups in the pulpit, she said, what a come down. And I thought about that too, because really, I know how it is elsewhere, but Texas began, I don't know if this was going on at this time, but Texas now has a lot of those like very large churches that like put on these big shows.
Yeah.
That may have started in the 70s or 80s. Yeah. I don't know. I just made that connection to what he was saying in terms of it becoming more than just faith. It's merging into popular culture and being used by popular culture maybe for certain things.
What led right into the TV
the TV
evangelists and stuff like that. Yeah.
So he's noticing a lot of things.
Yeah.
A lot of things going on.
I think there's a lot of factors that because I don't think, like you said, I think the sci-fi, being it labeled sci-fi, may have mitigated any fallout that would have happened to Moorcock, if there was going to be any towards this book. And by the time Satanic Verses came out, there was actually quite the increase in fundamentalist attitudes than there were in the 60s.
Yeah.
The 80s really brought out that that zeitgeist, I guess you could say, of a strong fundamental values, and something that would lead to the kind of backlash that Satanic Verses ended up getting. As somebody who lived through the backlash of, say, Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s, I remember that kind of that fundamentalist attitude towards things that were deemed blasphemous or satanic or what have you. And I'm not sure if that level of vitriol was quite there yet in '69.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think the Satanic Verses also got caught up in a political battle. I mean, there are already political, what I want to say, contestations between Iran and the West. So that became like a flashpoint for that. Whereas this book, kind of coming out of the hippie generation, so to speak, and
right, exactly.
just at a lot was going on, and so maybe this wasn't was a contribution to the culture, but there was a lot of other things catching people's attention as well. So
it was probably considered a contribution to the counterculture and the the cultural revolution of the late 60s that was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some guy who's suggesting that he meditate to find peace or something, right? In this, and that made me wonder. The 60s makes sense for that to be in there. Yeah. I was gonna ask. I didn't know that the title "Behold the Man" was a significant phrase from the Bible until something I was searching for on my Kindle showed this up, and it was a book about Jesus, and I was like, wait, does that phrase mean more than just, like, is that more than just the title of the book? But yeah, it was interesting when I found out.
Yeah. There's
I didn't know that either.
There's a Latin phrase that comes from. I used to take Latin. Esse homo translates to "behold the man" in Latin. It's a phrase traditionally attributed to Pontius Pilate when he presents Jesus to the crowd just before his crucifixion in the Gospel of John. So, it's a famous Latin phrase.
Makes perfect sense. Yep.
Yeah, but that's pretty provocative as well, because someone looking for a book about that term
right
may end up reading this book. They probably wouldn't get too far in it before they figured out they were reading the wrong book, but
or those who I that's the other thing, like if it's in bookshops and people who know their Bible would maybe take that book to be something other than it is. Or that's an interesting conversation about how this book was received. I'd like to know more about that, because it does have a very provocative setup.
I think now it would be easier to confuse it, because I almost did, as I'm searching the internet to find a copy, and I ended up going on archive.org, and there's they have the book up on archive.org, but they have some of the others as well, and So I think it's almost easier today to pull up the wrong title, whereas, back in the olden days where we had to actually go to the bookstore,
Yeah.
um, if you're in the sci-fi section, you could probably expect you were getting some kind of sci-fi book.
Mm.
But it's still a provocative title.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Any other topics about the book
Cool.
before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I thought
Um,
you could talk about the length of it. I guess it's very short. It's
Mhm.
uh, we mentioned that it was either a short novella. I don't know if that was it originally, and then he lengthened it, or if if it gets shortened down for a collection or not. But
mhm.
No, I think the short story came first,
did
if
it
I
come first?
remember correctly. It,
Okay, so he lengthened it. Maybe that was a published decision that he did that for, but it's still so short anyway that um, I don't think anybody would have any trouble just flying through this real fast because I found it enjoyable in that aspect, and that I could read it in like 2 sittings, like Chris said, and
Mhm.
and just and I thought it was yeah, it was easy, enjoyable to fly through. It's easy to read. It wasn't there was no convoluted type of wording or anything like that. It was just it was quite enjoyable actually.
It's interesting to me actually because I did read it in 2 sittings, so I did 50 pages and then just couldn't stop at a certain point. I think possibly because I could see where it was going and I sort of needed justification about that. But my retention of the book compared to a lot of the other reads where I do like 30, 40 pages at a time and stop, like a lot of the very early parts of the book and who he is as a person, I have not retained anywhere near as well as I would have said in a lot of the other discussions we have. So I think it's probably taught me a little bit about how best to approach reading these books in some ways to really get the meaning of the character and the person, because a lot of my takeaways are from the end of the book when it kind of links more to the past rather than the stuff in the present when he was sort of exploring who he was and it's the very veiled nature of his existence at that stage, because
Mm.
he's sort of eschewed an awful lot of people and the love that even they were giving him in terms of like, he didn't see that in himself, which I suppose is quite true of an awful lot of men in a lot of ways. People ascribe qualities to them that they don't see it themselves in a younger age.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, there's no plausible or logical explanation for him to be making the contact and the having suddenly the know-how to run a time machine and go back in time. Like, how did all that happen? Like, he just knew some guy, and then they hit it off, and then he said, "Hey, can I borrow your time machine?" And he's gone, and so that part of it, the story, if you're looking for that, if you're looking for sci-fi, that's
Yeah,
shaky. You don't want to dig too deep into that aspect of it.
absolutely.
Yeah. I do just want to bring up his last words, which was, "It's a lie. It's all a lie." I think, and again, just pointing out, um, the story he thought was true was a lie, but at the same time, he did launch, like, I mean, that, whether he needed to be there or not, I'm still not sure. But um, that time period launched like 1,000, 1,000 new things, more than 1,000. I mean, it was a turning point for everything. Um, but it sounds like Moorcock is saying it was the time period, not necessarily the man, getting to the title of Behold the Man, you know, um, because it could have been anyone or
Could have
could,
been, could have been, but
yeah.
it did require, like Monica said, it did require somebody with a martyrdom complex, a martyrdom conceit, and so it wasn't, somebody who's didn't have that built into them psychologically, because like he went to a lot of psychology in the book. Somebody who didn't have that built into them wouldn't have fit into the role that he did in order to
Yeah.
make that particular history happen. And so it could have been anybody with those traits, but it had to be somebody with those traits. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just so interesting. His martyrdom was such that it crossed time and space, to
Yeah.
become, what he became.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do wonder though if it
Brilliant.
because of, sorry, what? No. If
Google.
sorry, I thought someone said something, but because of everything else that was going on, it probably could have been anybody else, because John Baptist, he allowed him to die to a certain extent, right? So, and Baptist was looking for someone to be what was it he was looking for? A savior of sorts, right? Someone who would baptize him and be the one who God sent to free them or bring them. I don't remember what was his goal, but he was looking for a guy, and there were apparently many people going around claiming to be prophets. So somebody would
right.
have made the match, and maybe and John did want to sort of storm the gates of the Roman Empire, so that probably would have happened, and maybe didn't need to be him, um, which is I think that is maybe slightly more interesting for me than he made it happen. If he hadn't been there, it wouldn't have, because that goes back to the man and like the psychology of him. He felt like he needed to do this um and bring this about, but it could have been someone else, like not Jesus, but somebody else, because they did make him the son of that guy Joseph,
Yeah.
even when he wasn't. But
There's kind of a dimensional aspect to it where the right person for the job was born born in the wrong time.
hmm.
But fate has a way of fixing things like that. Um, so it
With the
just,
time machine.
yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
So beware, any of you,
Beware.
if your friend suddenly has a time machine in his living room, you don't want to go there.
Yeah. Don't go there just because you had an angry confrontation with your girlfriend. Maybe
Yeah.
think about it a little bit. All
Exactly.
right. Once again, the next few books that we're going to be reading in the upcoming months are going to be The Book of Skulls by Robert Silverberg for June, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells for July, The War of the Worlds again by H.G. Wells in August, and then Flowers for Algernon in September. If you'd like to read any of these with us, please check out the Patreon forum. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.